Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for taking your time to be here with us today. Thank you so much, whatever you may be at this hour from your home or office. Thank you so much for coming. So, I'm Anj Cerbolles, Productivity Analyst and Microsoft MVP in Business Application. I'm an Asian woman wearing a black shirt with a green ombre hair color and currently sitting in our living room. So, Microsoft MVP, or Most Valuable Professional, is an award given to technology experts who share the knowledge passionately with the community. And now I'm with my lovely co host for today, Suzanne.
Hi everyone, I'm Suzanne. I'm an Asian Chinese. I have brown hair and I'm wearing a white dungaree or overalls. I'm seated in my wardrobe room at home and I'm a DevRel program manager at Microsoft.
Um, do you remember 2 years ago, Suzanne, we talked about how we successfully built profiles in the community and how to make it a better community? And it was during Ignite as well. So today we're going to discuss about diversity and inclusion in a hybrid workplace. And I'm glad that you have here with me again to be a co-host.
Yes, 2 years ago was quite a long time, right? So this is actually a very important topic, close to our hearts, and I'm very, very grateful that you actually asked me to co-host today's conversation with you. So while I think we're not experts in this, it's great having everyone coming together to have this conversation and share stories. So Ange, what do we have today?
Okay, so what we have today is, before we start, we grab some coffee or tea and let's get started. So, as we want to have a welcoming and safe environment for everyone, please adhere to the event code of conduct. So we want to everyone to be respectful and be kind to one another. So if you have any questions or concerns, you just drop by an email to us, and you can be seen as well in your screen. So for today's event, we will have a session about inclusion in an evolving world, how the pandemic is shifting diversity and inclusion in the workplace, from Lindsay and Binna. And after that session, we will hear their own stories from our industry and community leaders and share their insights on how to be an ally and to be authentic with ourselves from GovTech, SG Enable, and our fellow Microsoft MVP. And Sus will have an allyship conversation from a minority and ethnicity background stories and have a Q&A from our panelists. So it's not just about Q&A. You can also drop your comments below or share your stories in the comment section. And then the last thing what we'll be going to do is we're going to share some resources and how to continue this conversation. So there are many things to cover and excited to learn.
Sounds great.
So now let's get started. So from Dr. Daryl Sue's book, Microaggressions in Everyday Life, Race, Gender, and Sexual Orientation. So in his definition about microaggressions are the everyday slight indignities, put-downs, and insults that members of marginalized groups experience in their day-to-day interactions with individuals who are often unaware that they are engaged in an offensive or demeaning way. So we thought some actions that were okay doing it, but there's a different meaning to the other. So have you ever experienced that, Sus?
Well, it's actually funny how you asked because this was really some time back in one of my earlier careers when somebody cheekily made that remark, "Hey, Sus, you're so cute. Why don't you go ask our director this favor instead?" So in terms of context, I clearly wasn't her favorite colleague, right? So while at that point, that remark naturally didn't make me feel uncomfortable, but in fact, I was actually feeling very uneasy. I didn't think of it as microaggression. But fast forward later today, I realized that microaggressions like that, they may seem so small, but they actually undermine one's identity.
That's an interesting comment. But now, next, let's hear it from Lindsay and Binna about this topic.
Real progress on diversity and inclusion doesn't happen without real work. Ideally, when we try to create change, we can do so without error. But that's not the kind of world we live in, the ideal kind. Even if we each had a blueprint, a prototype, or a manual, we would still have setbacks. We would still make mistakes. So each day we must strive to create a culture and a community that includes all of us. To ensure that systems and societies support all of us. We must create, iterate, and create again, because that's the work. Good intentions alone don't make real progress, and progress will never be perfect. Progress requires us each to examine our decisions, our perceptions, our attitudes, and the impact we have on the world around us. When it comes to diversity and inclusion, this is about honesty and accountability. This is about each of us choosing to do the work for all of us. Because we can't just do more. We can't just do better. We must do the work. Continue your inclusion journey with us at aka.ms/inclusion journey.
Hello, everyone. I'm Lindsay-Rae McIntyre, the Chief Diversity Officer of Microsoft, and thanks so much for joining us today for this important conversation. The work of diversity and inclusion is evolving, and there is a lot of conversation around remote work and hybrid work and the situations that some employees are finding themselves in, connecting in the workplace and connecting virtually. As these things continue to shift, we wanted to explore the ways in which things like bias, microaggressions, and other non-inclusive behavior might show up in workplaces around the world, and what we as leaders can be doing differently to support our employees and our organizations to evolve and get better right now. With that, I'm pleased to invite Professor Binna Kandola to the conversation. Professor Binna Kandola is a business psychologist, senior partner, and co-founder of Pearn Kandola. Over the past 35 years, he's worked on a wide variety of projects for public and private sector clients, both in the United Kingdom and around the world. He is the author of 10 books, 3 of which are on the subject of bias: The Invention of Difference, The Story of Gender and Bias at Work; The Value of Difference, Eliminating Bias in Organizations; and Racism at Work, The Danger of Indifference. He joined us earlier this year at Include 2021, and we're pleased to have him back with us today for this conversation. Welcome, Binna.
Thank you, Lindsay-Rae. It's a great pleasure to be back, and thank you for inviting me.
As you know, we like to start with a grounding on what we're talking about. At Microsoft, we've been exploring the topic of bias for years now, along with non-inclusive behavior like microaggressions. But for those who may be new to this topic, can you share a little bit more about what we're actually talking about in the context of microaggressions, bias in the workplace?
When we talk about, take microaggressions first, these are micro behaviors, obviously, but my definition is the kinds of daily or commonplace behaviors or aspects of an environment which signal wittingly or unwittingly to members of outgroups that they are not welcome and they don't belong. So they're small behaviors that we may be displaying, but also things around us in the environment.
It might be easy to disregard these things in the context of the diversity and inclusion work. Say there are small things in the context of the systemic changes that organizations are needing to make. Can you speak to why addressing these behaviors are so important?
I think they're critically important because what the research shows us, that the small gestures actually mean something, they count. And whether they're the small gestures that show that we're included or the small gestures that show we're excluded, we notice. And the small gestures that show us that we're excluded, it's actually been shown that it has a neurological impact. There's a part of the brain that lights up when we're feeling we're being excluded. It's called the dorsal anterior cingulate cortex. And intriguingly, it's the same part of the brain that feels pain, physical pain. If we stub our toe on a table leg, that is the same part of the brain. So the emotions that we feel are analogous to physical pain. And once we experience that and we're getting signals that we don't belong to this group, we then start to withdraw. Because it goes back to the kind of the tribal evolutionary behavior of tribal behavior. It's not safe for me to be here. We then withdraw. We then don't get involved in the team. The team don't get, so it kind of becomes a vicious cycle. But I get more signals that I don't belong. That then impacts my well-being. It's understandable, but it also, as research has shown, it impacts our performance as well. So these small behaviors have an impact in terms of my feelings about the group, my well-being, my performance. And as soon as my performance is impacted, that's going to affect my annual reviews, which then affect my pay, which will then affect whether I get put onto the talent programs. And it all starts from here, from us interacting with one another. It's that critical.
And at a time when there is an enormous amount for all organizations to focus on big systems changes around diversity and inclusion, some might be asking, why are we focused on the microaggressions or on individual bias?
Yeah, it's a great question. It is a great question, actually. And I think a lot of people do think that, actually. We have policies, we've got a strategy, we've got a target, we're making some progress. It's all sorted, so it's somebody else's responsibility. Actually, it's all of our responsibilities, and it shows up in us in those small behaviors. So if you imagine in the pre-pandemic world and the post-pandemic world, you turn up to an office, you get a nod of recognition from the person at reception. You go into the lift is crowded. Somebody at the back of the lift you recognize. They raise their eyebrows, droop their shoulders, smile, just letting you know, back again. You walk into your office, your boss is there already on a video call, gives you a wave. And as your computer's booting up, you go and get your first hit of coffee for the caffeine for the day, and somebody has a conversation with you. Insignificant. Mundane, nothing that you would go home and tell anybody about in the evening or you even reflect upon. But imagine if those things were not present, that you didn't get that nod of recognition, you didn't get the wave, nobody asked you what you're up to at the weekend. Or if those things were missing, think what the workplace was like. And think if you didn't get those behaviors and you were behind the person who did. Now you're being excluded in very subtle ways, and it has an enormous impact. And we're programmed to be like this. Human beings are programmed to pick up on these small cues.
When you think about sort of the extra complexity, if you will, of engaging with one another through a screen, what is perhaps the same about the research that you've done for years on bias and microaggression? And what are you seeing that's changing?
Yes, some of it has changed, and it's the nature of the work itself. I mean, the way we've been working, we haven't just been remote working. We've been working in what's called a capsule environment, where we're working in the same environment and we're kind of with the same people all the time. So there's sensory deprivation as well. And what we know is, just generally speaking, from the research that's been done in other capsule environments like polar ice cap expeditions, nuclear submarines, space station missions, what we know is the longer a mission goes on, the more you get something known as psychological closing that takes place. So we start communicating with the people that we are more familiar with. So there's a closing down. So our in-group gets even smaller, and we start passing information. We start passing less risk information and less information anyway to people outside of the group. We get what's known as autonomization. So we start to get a strong sense of ourselves with our small group, which means the others become even more kind of stereotyped. And we tend to blame them for other things that go on. So there's a lack of empathy. So generally speaking, this is what goes on. And that within that, you will find that groups who are less represented and may represent diversity in our organizations, less represented at senior levels or less represented at all, there are significant issues that this pandemic has posed to them, whether it's people with disabilities, minorities, women, parents, wherever the LGBT plus, all of those are place-specific issues as well.
A few things came up for us at Microsoft this year that show how the diversity and inclusion conversation is evolving. Topics like mental health, working parents and caregivers, age, and the acts of hate and violence against many communities around the world. What insights do you have on how these topics are coming up around the world in your client sets or in your research?
Yeah, we are sociable animals. So actually missing that human contact has been really significant for everybody. And that will affect our mental health, actually. And it's also about that the things that we kind of took for granted, like the journey to work. It's boring, it's mundane, I'd rather not do it. On the other hand, the journey from your house to the railway station, from the railway station to your workplace, buying a coffee en route, all of those things meant that we were interacting with different people and there was different sensory stimuli that we were getting. So the interactions you are having with the people in your household will be different from the ones in the railway station, the different one in the coffee shop, and different the ones that you have in your office. And we miss that. We miss that kind of variety of human engagement, and that starts to impact part of that starts to impact our mental health. The point about caregivers were impacted. In our research that we did, caregivers were impacted more than people who didn't have caring responsibilities. And parents in particular were their job satisfaction and their well-being was impacted more than people who didn't have those caring responsibilities. And within the category of parents, mothers were affected more than fathers. And so this point about intruding into people's households, and particularly when the schools were shut down in many parts of the world, it kind of became apparent then that the person you're talking to is a mother, and implicitly were we thinking, why aren't you looking after your children? Or are your children affecting your work? And we found in our research that of all of the groups that we looked at, women's identity and authenticity was affected the most. And we think it's this point about this intrusion into people's home life and this kind of expectation, these prescriptive stereotypes that people had. Age research done around the world, young people concerned about their careers, older people, 55 plus, they're actually concerned about, impacted hugely actually by being put on furlough or reduced hours. That then impacted their retirement plans. So all age groups were impacted. And I think the final group you mentioned was the anti-Asian prejudice. And we found in research last year and this year in Britain and America that there was a huge increase in anti-Asian prejudice, both in the workplace and outside of it. Interestingly, when we had about 1,000 people in our survey, but we did a lot of interviews in both countries. And interestingly, in organisations, the people told us there was a variety of experience, but some people told us when it started going on in our organisation, the leadership in this organisation said, "Pack it in. This isn't acceptable. It's not in line with our values." And they told us it stopped. And it just shows you how sometimes the measures can be as simple as that, as the leader just come and say, you know what, this isn't us. It's not our values. Don't do it. And it can have an immediate impact.
I remember as we prepared for this conversation, you provided a piece of insight that I thought was really interesting, that for folks who are used to an in-office culture environment, in some cases, it was very obvious what meetings you were in or not. And with the virtual interaction that we all have, sometimes we don't even know what we're being excluded from anymore.
Yeah. Actually, that happened. We did some research on anti-Asian prejudice in the light of coronavirus. And we had some examples of people of Asian origin, or what we would call in Britain of Chinese heritage. Actually, I'm not even sure you call it a microaggression, but it was happening without their knowledge. They were not being invited to meetings. And one person told us that they kind of thought, oh, I think I should be in that meeting. And somehow they got themselves into it. And they got into the meeting and found the other people giggling, chuckling over the fact that they'd excluded this person, not knowing they then kind of barged in. So there is that kind of thing about who gets invited. It's more formal and you don't know whether they're going on or not. It's a great point, actually, Lindsay-Rae.
Yeah, for us at Microsoft, it's been really important for us to obviously be accountable and responsible for the technology and creating a more inclusive experience and giving control to the end users and how people engage in the chat or in the room. Yeah. That we have raise the hand features, and one of the things that we've talked a lot about is how COVID and the sort of camera on expectations of the pandemic have invited people into spaces that maybe we weren't ready to have them join us in, like our homes, and the uneven experience that we have, and the empathy with it we must build for people who don't have same or similar broadband infrastructure, for people who are living in shared spaces with roommates or extended family. Can you talk about sort of how we need to be more thoughtful about the biases, microaggressions, and non-inclusive behavior that come from the difference of circumstance that we all find ourselves in a hybrid workplace?
Yeah, I think that it's a really valuable insight that the woman you just given. Actually, I want to go back to something you said earlier in a moment, actually, about the different ways of interacting, because I think that's a really important, and that's a very positive point. But this point, actually, you wouldn't normally see where I am. Now, this is fine, actually. It's an airy room. I've got a desk. I've got to have a laptop. I've got a computer, rather. So it's respectable. But like you said, if you're in a bed sit, your laptop is literally on your lap. You're kind of sharing your living environment with people in a way that you wouldn't ordinarily do, and you're seeing other people kind of more comfortable, and you're feeling slightly inadequate because of it. And back to that point about microaggressions, we tend to concentrate on the interpersonal behaviour for obvious reasons, but my definition also had about aspects of the environment. And this aspect of the environment, if I'm feeling uncomfortable about the environment in which I am, comparing it to others, and I'm concerned about the judgments that people will be making about me, and they may not be, of course, now I'm concerned about the judgment that could count as an environmental micro inequity that people are experiencing.
Are there regional and national issues that we need to consider and be thoughtful of in the context of inclusion for the new world of work? Are there things about the ways of working that may differ from culture to culture?
Yeah, I'm sure an organisation like Microsoft will know this already, but you'll already be aware of the kind of the cultural differences, whether a culture is individualistic or more community oriented. There are differences along that, whether it's hierarchical or more egalitarian. There are differences that exist, and the technology can make it. We can forget actually that when we have a meeting that the environment in which people, the culture and people working is actually very different from the one I may be located in now. But the things that you would already be aware of, that in some parts of the world, actually the living quarters of people, where they live, is actually much more constrained. Property prices are so high that actually working from home is a really uncomfortable experience, and that people would rather be in the office.
We talk a lot about the importance of psychological safety and the incredible innovation and contribution that gets unlocked when we create this aspirational space that is psychologically safe. But how do we do that? What advice would you have for leaders who aspire to that and yet don't necessarily know how to get there?
Yeah, I mean, the notion of psychological safety, as you know, is actually that the people can feel they can be themselves, they can speak up in a meeting without fear of any consequences to their career or their self-image within the group. So they just feel they can speak up and be themselves, and of course that then makes it a very central concept when we're talking about inclusion. But the leaders need to demonstrate it themselves. I mean, and you did say this a moment ago, actually, where leaders have to speak up. I'm not getting different views here. And there are processes you can follow. You get people to act as devil's advocate, ask the alternative questions. What if somebody else thought this? Bring a hypothetical person into the room. What do you think they might be saying here? But when it comes to inclusion, and where leaders are getting feedback from their teams, so we have a tool where you can get feedback from your teams about how inclusive you are, and you can get insight into your own behaviours. But where a leader gets feedback and then acts on the feedback, that's clearly helping the leader. It's helping them create a more inclusive team. It also has been found to create more psychological safety, because people then think, oh, I can actually give feedback to my boss, And if they like it, they'll act upon it. So I may give them more feedback in the future.
How do we think about the muscles that we must build or the conversations we must have to be successful around diversity and inclusion in hybrid in the context of a global company conversation?
Yeah, I think we just need to recognize that hybrid working, that some people will prefer to work from home, other people come into the office or the workplace, they'll come into the workplace more often. There will be a tendency, there always has been a tendency actually to have a bias towards those people who are physically close to us, the ones who are in the workplace with us. And that we've all been, or many of us actually have been working from our homes, not everybody, but many of us have been working from our homes. We kind of got used to it. And then we just need to be aware that the people who are closer to us in the workplace are the ones who tend to become our in-group. And we mustn't forget the people who are working from home because they're part of our team. They are part of our business. They are part of the productive life of this organization. And if we ignore them, we are reducing the effectiveness of our organization overall.
Yeah, at Microsoft, we for sure have seen productivity either stay the same or in fact increase. And yet we too see the challenges of creating boundaries between work and life, and the need for us to be able to have really intentional, explicit conversations with our peers and with our managers on when we're working, where we're working, how we're working, so that that's all sort of said out loud and everybody feels like they're informed and connected. And you know, with that, the opportunity to create boundaries and be more flexible over the course of a work day for sure is creating relief. And as Microsoft, I know that, you know, we've really challenged ourselves over the course of hybrid to think about how we can be creative and innovative in how we support our employees in new and different ways. And I know that lots of other companies have done that too, in the context of, you know, an incredibly competitive environment. It's on all of us as employers and as leaders to think hard about how we can be more empathetic, how we can be more supportive of our employees, and how we can create the conditions for folks to thrive in a hybrid environment, in a workplace environment, and everything in between.
There was so much richness in what you just said. I just have to comment on some of it. I mean, I just go back to your first comment, actually, about the showing creativity about how we work here, about leaders showing creativity. And this notion, and this has come out from the research as well, actually, that particularly people who are furloughed, there's less trust in their line managers. But this notion that we're going to have to create a new future together is, and it's the point that you just made, it's just a point, I just think it's such an important point, that if we're going to make this work, we're going to have to do it, but by leaders and colleagues together, kind of working actually what's going to make this work. And the other point I just want to underline, actually, from what you said, Lindsay-Rae, was the point about empathy. It's just such an incredible ability that human beings have, that we can put ourselves into the shoes of somebody else. And we tend to have a circle of people. We kind of have a circle of empathy, and the people who are closest to us, we are most empathetic towards. But there's no reason why we can't extend that circle, and that's effectively what you're saying, actually. That we need to have that ability to empathise and just kind of think, you know, I'm going to empathise with a few more people than I did before. I was just reflecting what you just said. I just want to underscore it.
So many leaders are wondering, Lindsay-Rae and Binna, like, this is a great conversation, but what can I do? And so I'd love you to share with our audience maybe one or two things that you think they can do.
Yeah, I mean, you've touched on it already, actually, that about what you're doing at Microsoft is you have conversations about it, you talk about it. And I think one of the things I have picked up on, for some of the topics about diversity and inclusion, I've come across leaders kind of say, I'm really concerned, I'm very bothered about diversity, I know we can be better on inclusion. I know as a leader I need to talk about this, and I also know that I'm very anxious about talking about this for fear of saying the wrong words, using the wrong expression, causing offence when I didn't mean to. And so what do I do about that? And so they have this real concern about diversity and inclusion, and the anxiety about talking about it, they end up doing nothing. And I think, like you're saying, actually talk about it, but actually be authentic in talking about it. So you say, I am really concerned. Diversity and inclusion is really, really important to me. It's a value that I hold. I think great. It's a value part of the corporation as well. But I also feel anxious in discussing this. So should I say, I am going to talk about it, but should I cause any offence? Please remember that that's not my intention. So put me straight, give me the feedback, but I don't mean to cause offence. So just assume good intent on my part. So I think we need to just be authentic in terms of the whole set of experiences, the whole set of feelings that we have about this, but then talk about it, and then talk about your own experiences, what it means to you. And I think it is a big change, actually, that I've noticed compared to the start of my career, which was decades ago. The leaders today are genuinely interested, involved, motivated. They want to do something about diversity, and I think they could be talking more from the heart now, rather than having something scripted for them that they don't really understand.
Yeah, I love that. And one of the things that we've done at Microsoft through our allyship work and sort of having the conversation is giving leaders and peers and colleagues the language and the structure to be able to signpost exactly that. I'm going to try this on for size team, or I'd like to pause the conversation to highlight something that I'm acknowledging right now, or I see going on right now. And, I'm working on my allyship skill sets. And so here I go, right? And that sometimes when you sort of say it out loud and signpost your intentionality and what you're working on, not only will you have the space to do it, but you will also get really thoughtful feedback that you can take and accommodate and learn and grow from, because goodness knows we're all going to have to fail in this space to continue to get better.
Oh, that's so true. I mean, I think it's a constant frustration that I have, actually, that I just trip up. So I trip up so often, and I think I trip up less often now than I used to. But that's the whole point, isn't it? You trip up, you learn, you dust yourself off, you carry on. It's kind of there's nobody perfect, basically, is there? That we're all learning.
I want to thank Professor Binna Kandola for joining us and sharing his perspectives. We have Professor Binna Kandola from Include 2021 and so many other experts and academics on our Inclusion Journey website, which I hope you'll join us on. It can be found at aka.ms/inclusion journey. And we'll continue adding to the conversation. We hope you'll join us as we grow and learn together.
That was a great insight. So what I've learned during that session is that you need to be empathetic to the person you're interacting with, especially when everyone is working from home, because you'll never know the struggles they're having at the moment, and be kind to yourself and other people. So just be authentic and learn from each other. So especially during this pandemic. So everyone is struggling, but some more than others. And now let's hear from our panelist stories. So this time we're going to hear their own stories. So let me introduce to you our panelists. So the first one that I'm going to introduce to you is Gloria. Gloria, she is a product design lead from Government Digital Services in Singapore. Hi, Gloria. And next one is Rene Modery, APAC Collaboration and Productivity Tools Project Manager, and also a Microsoft MVP in Office Apps and Services. And then next one is Lim Xiang, a Deputy Director, Operations Strategy, Employment and Employability in SG Enable. And lastly, welcome back, Suze.
Hi.
Okay, so this, it's It's so sad that you're not here to the screen. Okay, so this session, it's not going to be fully about microaggressions, but really let's take more on high level back to the fundamentals. First on why it matters, what D&I means to us, and how organizations are doing it. So before we start, I want everyone to please introduce yourself. It's just 1 to 2 sentences. And then let's begin with Gloria.
Sure. Hi, everyone. I'm excited to be here. As Anj mentioned, I currently am a product design lead working in the Government Digital Services Singapore. I also helped start the digital accessibility team of GovTech, looking at building accessible services across the whole of government. Excited to be here. Thank you.
Thank you, Gloria. Next is Rene.
Yeah, hello everyone. My name is Rene. I'm working for WPP. I'm working as a regional Office 365 project manager as part of a global team. So basically looking after all our Office 365 related projects and initiatives. I'm also a Office 365 MVP, Microsoft MVP, and additionally, I'm also a father of 2 young children.
Thank you, Rene. And next is Tion.
Hi everyone, happy to be here. I'm from SG Enable, which is a focal agency that oversees the disability sector in Singapore. And one of the key things that we look at is really to build an inclusive society and to enable persons with disabilities. And specifically for myself, it's about employment, so helping persons with disability find jobs even in this pandemic. Thank you.
And now, Suz.
Right. Okay. So I think I've earlier. Sorry. No, I've earlier sort of like introduced myself. Yeah. So I'm actually a DevRel manager with Microsoft. Something interesting about myself, I have 4 cats at home, so working remotely has always been a challenge. So yeah. Yeah. And I wanted to thank all the panelists as well for appearing on the show today. Yeah.
Thank you so much. And nice to meet you, everyone. So during this pandemic, everyone went to virtual. So some are going back to the office, especially for the first line of workers, which is we salute them. But some are still working remotely. So everyone has different settings in households when working from home. I still love to go to the office, but for some reason I'm work from home remotely. So for diverse perspectives, sometimes I work in my working space, or sometimes dining table, or even in the coffee table at the back of my working space. But yeah, as I've mentioned, everyone has a different settings, different spaces, sharing with family members and lovely pets. But now I've known Rene for quite some time now, and we recently did some virtual events like this kind of settings. But working from home, are you still working from home, Rene?
Yes, I am. So was expecting to go back to the office sometime mid of last year or so, but it always shifted, and now I'm hoping just to go back to the office at some point next year again. But right now, really full-time working from at home.
So what are the difficulties that you're currently facing working from home?
Yeah. So as mentioned, I'm a father of 2 young children. So my daughter is in primary school. She started primary school last year, and my son is in kindergarten. He's going to start primary school next year. And basically, the biggest change was basically expectations or how things were supposed to be working, and they didn't work. Obviously, beginning of last year, as mentioned, my daughter started primary school. So she went to school, I was working, and then after school, then after student care, I fetched her, those kind of things. But then the pandemic came, and in Singapore, and we had that, I don't know how many weeks of being at home and switching to home-based learning, and things just went completely, I don't call it haywire, but it was very different from what everybody was expecting. And personally, it really meant then, I don't have my 9 to 6 p.m. working day or so or something like that, but rather I get up early in the morning, get my daughter, get settled with her home-based learning. But because she was so young, she didn't really know how to use the laptop, how to do things. She had to get used to all those things. So she really needed a lot of additional support, which really meant that there was a lot of interruption basically in the morning for whatever I was supposed to be doing. So it really meant it wasn't really properly working in a way. So I had to shift and be a bit more flexible when it comes to what I'm doing. meetings, for example, I moved all my meetings from the morning to the afternoon, or maybe sometimes even evening, just to make sure that, yes, I've got the time to, for example, work with my daughter, make sure that she can do her learning, but also that I can still have time for me and basically focus on the work that I'm supposed to be doing. And obviously it was not just me in that situation, but also a lot of colleagues encountered the same thing. Those with older kids, so for example, secondary school, obviously that was much easier usually for them, but a lot of others with primary school children then also faced similar issues where they had to make sure, we are not just basically at home, but suddenly at the same time, but there's also additional commitment required towards the children, additional support required. And it became clear then, the difficulty switched from, when can I quickly find time with a colleague, to, it's getting difficult to actually find some time because we might have very different working hours right now. Some switch to working late evening, some work early in the morning, all those kind of things. So it became a matter of really discussing it among ourselves, making sure that we understand who's working when, communicating that with each other, and making sure then, yes, sometimes we might also then support each other in some way if required. If one colleague is not available right now, maybe he's only back later today, so I'm going to jump in for him or her, those kind of things.
It is sometimes exhausting, mentally exhausting, if you are working from home. You don't know the boundaries between home and then the office work. So sometimes it's mentally exhausting. But yeah, how about you, Gloria? Do you have, are you still working from home or going back to office as well? And what's your current setup?
Yeah, I mean, personally, my current setup is I'm working mostly from home still. I don't expect to be in the office anytime soon. I think for GovTech, it's pretty predominantly work from home to moving forward. The office itself is moving into a hot desking kind of environment. And yeah, so it's exciting. Personally, I like being at home, because it just is a lot more convenient, and the cutting of the commute time is great. But of course, foresee some difficulties as well, right? I think part of it is especially meetings. I think Rene talked about different times that people meet. That's one. The second thing is also different places. So for example, some of our colleagues had to visit loved ones in hospital, or might prefer to work out of a cafe, or work from the office. And how do you ensure that everyone is able to hear each other in a noisy environment? How do you use the online tools without necessarily excluding people who are dialing in from mobile? So there's all of these different questions that come up on a tactical level. And I guess on a sort of more broad level, there's also a question of how do I keep pulse to the larger organizational direction, and division-wide moves. That's been a little bit hard, with all of us working from home.
So currently as well in my current one is because I'm always also in a diverse community workplace, and diversity and inclusion is our major priorities. And we also have this training about belongingness and how to be authentic with ourselves and learn from each other. So why do you think that D&I is significant in workplace, Xiang?
I think for us, it is very clear that diversity and inclusion, especially when you are talking about integrating persons with disability into the workforce, is critically important. In fact, we see it as a strategic business imperative. And there are many studies that have shown that companies that are disability inclusive in their hiring practices tend to be more productive. They have a better financial performance, whether it's profit margins or revenue growth, or even in terms of their employees being more engaged, or even looking at lower turnover rates. So there are many business reasons why companies embark on a disability inclusive journey. And it goes beyond just talking about corporate social responsibility or tokenism, but really there are companies, many of them, who were actually recognized during our recent ceremony back in August. We had the inaugural Enabling Mark Awards ceremony. The Enabling Marks really serve to accredit and to recognize companies that are disability inclusive and to really benchmark and promote some of their best practices in this area. So really just to cite an example, we have our local bank, one of the big three, UOB. They have actually set up a scan hub at Enabling Village. So they started off by saying, hey, I have a business issue. I need people who are able to digitalize and to scan some of my client documents. Then they were looking around who are some of these possible candidates who can do this job well. In fact, they were looking for people who had high level of concentration, attention to detail, and highly accurate in what they were doing. So they worked with us and also with one of our social service agency partners, the ARC, Autism Resource Center, to then say, hey, actually this group of persons with autism actually fit very well into the profile that the bank was looking for. So with that, they actually established their scan hub. It's been many years now, I think close to 10 years already since the formation of establishment of the Enabling Village. They have been there since the start. And what they have actually noticed is that the turnover rate has gone down tremendously. They used to have, I think, close to 40-50% turnover. And when they brought the person with disability on board, the turnover rate actually dropped to single digit. And they actually realized that the productivity levels went up by close to 30%. So I think really this is an excellent case study of a company that initially was new to disability inclusive hiring, but then over time, they recognized that there are actually many tangible business benefits and imperatives for them to actually embark on this journey.
That's an interesting story. How about you, Suz?
Actually, I just want to build on the point that Ziyang mentioned, right? Like, I think he mentioned about like this whole, like how it actually helps businesses as well. So I think it's true, like for D&I, right? It's no longer just, like a good to have, but it's imperative, right? So basically, I mean, a very, very simple example would be Fenty Beauty. I'm sure everybody sort of like quite familiar with Fenty Beauty. So like it's launched by Rahana, like she with LVMH, that's by Sephora, right? Basically. Yeah. So she basically redefined the beauty industry by having like 40 different shades of foundation. So before she actually had this launch, I think the colors were pretty limited. So you see, this is like externally how it benefits the business itself, but pretty much we should actually look internally as well. So I think Zia made a very valid point about like this whole like creativity, innovation. I think we also spoke about, I think the video earlier, like, I mean, given that things are now in a hybrid setting, right? How do we actually ensure that our employees, because we're talking inwards, right? How do employees in different workplaces, how do they actually feel not left out and they feel like they have a sense of belonging in general? Yeah. So I think at the end of the day, organizations need to sort of like step in to sort of see how they can actually create an environment that's suitable for employees. So it's pretty similar to like, let's put an example. It's pretty similar to a pond. Basically, if let's say the environment is not suitable, fishes will then die, right? So same thing, like you have to make sure that the environment is suitable so that you don't lose your best and the brightest. Yeah.
And I guess the organization is not only the D&I conversation is not only for HR, but also in the whole organization itself. Like everyone has a part on it. In which, how can we make like a workplace be more friendly and be more empathetic for you, Rene, because you're working globally, and also for Gloria itself? How can we somehow make our workplace be more friendly or to be authentic in your own personal thoughts?
Yeah.
So as I mentioned, basically from my personal experience with working with colleagues in Singapore, in generally all over Asia Pacific, but also in the US and in Europe, there were a lot of discussions that were happening just to get a better understanding. What's the situation for that other person that I'm quite likely working with relatively often right now, also in the near future? I want to understand, hey, my colleague in the UK, he's always awake and online and working when I'm starting my workday in the morning. But isn't it like after midnight for him or so. So the idea is then, checking with him. Oh, you always work so late. What's happening? Or so, just to understand, is that something permanent? Did he arrange for it, or is he, I don't know, stressed with work? Is there something else happening, etc.? And for example, in his case, he said, oh, he likes to work basically late at night because that's when his kids are sleeping. So during the day, then he has more time for the kids then, just as an example. Other people then might have similar arrangements where they say, yes, we've got different work times or office hours. So they just need to make sure that, yes, it gets communicated to the people they work with. But on the other hand, then we also might need to basically reach out and just have that conversation with people to understand moving forward, where are you working and when are you working? Because right now we just talked about where we are, and we can all see we are all working from home right now. But expectation is that next year, for example, a lot of us will move partially back into the office, maybe fully, maybe only to a certain extent. But there's going to be a switch again, and we need to basically make sure that doesn't matter where the colleagues are or so, we should be able to make sure that we can work efficiently with them by understanding basically their situation that they're in.
Yeah, I think to build on Rene's point, right? Like a lot of the question on how to be more empathetic in the workplace, I feel are similar principles, whether it is in person or online, right? Like, and to me, it boils down to boundary setting as well as respecting boundaries, right? Like in Rene's case, for example, it's like someone saying like, okay, I prefer working at night at this time. Like I mentioned, one of my colleagues had to visit the hospital quite regularly. So he'll be like, okay, like, you know, these 2 hours are when I can have actual meetings. But also like, you know, like understanding not only the timing and the thing, but also what he's feeling. For example, like on one end, he is prioritizing a lot of like family related things, but also then on the other hand, like there is an emotional need around like feeling still valued by the team and relevant, like that his contributions are relevant, and like constantly affirming that need and still like reinforcing that in one-on-ones and whatnot. I think the difference between the remote setting as well as like the in-person setting is like the boundaries have to be a lot more explicitly stated, and like the statement of it has the declarations of which happen in rather engineered environments. So like I wonder, like that makes it more difficult, but I think it also brings out the opportunity of being more intentional about it, like setting scheduled one-on-ones where we ask each other like, how are we doing kind of questions, what really are our priorities at any point. It might differ from week to week, and like discussing them regularly and intentionally rather than sweeping them under the rug. I feel like it's one way we try to practice being more empathetic in our team.
I agree. It should be proper communication and understanding with each other. So, how about you, Suzanne and Sia? What is your organization doing? How to be more diverse and inclusive in the workplace?
For me, I think I'll talk broadly about the disability sector and what some of the challenges and opportunities are for persons with disability. So we all know that last year was an unprecedented year. It's well reported that people were losing their jobs, not just in Singapore, but globally. But I think what is not so well documented or talked about is that the pandemic had also opened up new opportunities for persons with disability. When you talk about remote work, hybrid work, and you think about persons with disability who might have mobility challenges, who in the past might have difficulty traveling to the workplace, independent traveling. And with this whole movement and shift towards remote and hybrid work, it actually opened up a new spectrum and whole new, area that we have never encountered before. So even things like freelancing work, gig jobs, people at home, looking at web designing, doing coding and programming. So I came across this very interesting story that was told to me. There's this landscaping company in Singapore that was involved in helping to do landscape work for a Singapore pavilion at the Dubai Expo. So this story happened about 2 to 3 months ago, still at the height of the pandemic. And what I was told is this local company hired a person with disability who was working from home in Singapore and he's working as a machine learning specialist. So basically what he did was to feed data and information into a robot. And the robot was actually in Dubai. The robot was actually, doing landscaping work for the Singapore Pavilion. So you have this person with disability who is literally working from anywhere, right? Working from home. And he was at home feeding the robot the data, and then the robot in Dubai will be then identifying which are the unhealthy pots of plants and then removing them. So that was totally fascinating. And to me, I think that is precisely what we are trying to move towards also, that when we talk about the pandemic, obviously it has affected very traditional services sectors that hire persons with disabilities, like your retail outlets, your food and beverage, your hospitality, your hotels. But at the same time, we see many new opportunities being opened up, especially in the technology space. So that's where we are also pivoting our efforts to working with partners like Microsoft to identify, companies that can actually partner with us on this disability inclusive journey.
Right.
Oh,
Okay. Thanks. Yeah. No, I wanted to say thank you, Ziyang, for the call. That was awesome. But yeah, okay. So I think from my point of view, I think I also agree very much with like Gloria and Rene, what they mentioned earlier, to actually set boundaries. I think in Microsoft internally, right, what we do, right, we actually do have like a lot of us actually put in our email signature, what exactly is our working hours. Also because the team is very, very remote. So like, in fact, I'm like the only one in my team that's based out of Asia. The rest of my teammates are all in PDT time zone, which is like the West Coast in general. So yeah, it's always a challenge. And we have like advocates who work like across everywhere. So I think generally we made it very clear like what are our working hours, and that actually helps. To the point of like what Ziyang mentioned, right? I think in general about like people with disabilities or people who are different of all abilities in general. I think it's making sure that we have an open mind and having conversations on how to be better to support people from all abilities. So for example, like treating people equally is not exactly treating people fairly. I think that's something that we need to like learn. And how we can do that at the end of the day is really having a growth mindset. I mean, we can all come together, like to me, I feel we can all come together being diverse, different background. But at the end of the day, if we have like no growth mindset, we're not willing to hear from others, then we are pretty much stagnant. Yeah. So this D&I thing wouldn't work. So yeah, so generally for me, I believe in having an open mindset, having conversations, allyship, that would actually be better and be more empathetic. Yeah.
That's a great insight. Oh, I remember, Suzanne, you have someone that you're going to introduce to us.
Right.
To
Okay. Yes.
move.
Yep, sure. Yeah. So coming up next, I think first of all, let's thank all the
Thank you so much for
panelists first. Yes. So yeah, before we drop the panelists off the screen, yeah, thank you so much. And I'm gonna like invite my friend next. So okay, thank you, panelists. I'm gonna drop you off the screen right now, just so it doesn't
Thank you
feel
so
very
much,
awkward.
everyone.
Right. So coming up, we have Mehu. Mehu, I'm gonna push you up on the screen. Say hi.
Hi, Miho.
Hello. Hi.
Okay, so yeah, so I mean, just let me introduce Mehu and Anj, right? So Mehu is a good friend of mine. Basically, we have known each other for a while. We go on hikes together, and he's basically a friend that I generally bounce ideas off, and even honestly ask him things like so not to offend, right? So so today I've asked him to come online so that we can hear from a minority's perspective or his perspective on times whereby he encountered unconscious biasness and how we can be better allies. So before we start, Anj, I will drop you off the screen so that you know, Mehu and I will have a chat on this. Yeah. Okay. See you in a bit. Hi. Okay. So Mehu, why don't you quickly introduce yourself?
Okay. First and foremost, thanks to Anj and Suz for inviting me and for everyone tuning in. So I'm Mehu, Asian Indian male with short black hair, and my main background is in communications. But these days, I also work closer with the developers and designers. Mostly work from home, given the climate, and I also have a 3-year-old at home.
Right. Okay, so so really happy to hear to get you on board. So I wanted to share with you a story that I've recently heard, and I wanted to get your thoughts. So one of my friends actually reached out to me. He was actually part of an interview panel. He wasn't exactly the HR, but he was part of the interview panel, and they were actually looking for a intern. And basically in the end they rejected this candidate simply because they felt like she wasn't ready for a intern role. She was probably more suitable for a longer stint, like not a full-time role basically. Yeah, so I think what happened was then a few weeks later, basically it seemed like she posted on social media to share her experience at an interview panel. The HR person who interviewed her then commented that, hey, like, are you having this interview from home? Why does your home look so neat? It's a surprise. Yeah, so I think she took it in a more offensive manner. So my friend reached out to me and say, hey, Suz, maybe you know this better. What do you think? I think at that point I wasn't able to comment much because clearly we're different. She's someone from a minority ethnicity. So I mean, having like I don't share her experience. I don't know what she has gone through. It's really hard for me to sort of share that as well. So I thought, to reach out to you and, bounce this off you. What do you think?
Okay. So thanks for sharing about that. So I'll speak more from a layman and individual viewpoint, of course. And I think you summed it up well. It's about context and being mindfulness. So for the fact that there was a little bit of thinking and thought behind it, as you went through that scenario that your friend shared with you, I think that in itself is a step in the right direction when you're actually trying to understand better why someone could have reacted that way. And like you said, different people, different experiences. I think we may not sometimes have that full context in this case, but it's good for us to be a bit more mindful about why we said something and why the other person could have reacted that way. So I think the point about microaggression is that it applies to workplace, but even to other settings as well. In my case, and I mean, coming from a minority, I guess I've been fortunate not to really experience some of these things quite as such. Or maybe sometimes we don't even realize it or choose not to, right? Even those are possibilities. But I do know of friends or their friends also in a minority setting, who may have experienced it in a workplace. So similarly to the questions you asked about, why is your house so neat, right? Some people might take offense. There could be other examples that I've heard. For example, you speak English really well for someone from country XYZ or foreign land, right? So while it comes across very innocuous, it comes across very complimentary, but sometimes, someone might just take it the other way because they might think, why am I not supposed to be speaking good English, proper English? Or oh, where are you from? Where are you really from? When they're actually from Singapore as well. So I think what's really important on that point, an example, is actually recognizing microaggressions. And these are things that probably could be ascertained or learned over time, whether they're verbal, non-verbal cues, they're not necessarily intentional. In fact, I think most of the time they're probably not intentional, but it's really about being a bit more aware. So, and it doesn't just transcend to ethnicity. It could be religion, it could be gender, it could be age, it could even be disability.
Yep, I agree. And the thing about like preparing for this session, I actually have been reading up, and I realized that as I read up more, like actually so many instances of these around. It's just that we have been like pretty oblivious. So like certain things, like for example, I hear it all the time in workplace. Like people say, hey, you're a mom, your focus is on family, right? I think it kind of like plays down somebody's identity and ability, which shouldn't be that case. And something that I hear as well, like not to me, but others, would be something like, oh, you're so great looking. You should consider a different career. You shouldn't be working on this. You shouldn't be here, Yeah, so I think these are little things that actually kind of like fester and undermine somebody. So I don't know whether you heard earlier, like I've shared with Anj, like how in my earlier career, like somebody mentioned that, hey, you should go talk to the director since you're so cute, right? I mean, looking at how I could have done it differently, I think I should have spoken about how I truly felt then, rather than let it fester in me or like, diminish me. So I think having conversations are actually very important. Yeah.
I agree. So I think some of these things are a little bit of weightage and perspective, how we approach them, awareness over time. So you brought up the point that I wanted to bring up next actually is that communication is key, right? So talking about things usually gives you a bit of a better idea of things, even if not always the solution itself. Right.
Yep.
And in the work context, since we're talking about workplace, providing a culture and safe work environment is important. So I mean, this could even mean like providing opportunities for someone who might be affected by something, because there could be at times, and it's only natural that sometimes people are concerned that they'll be judged or not taken seriously if they share.
And I think it's also to be very oblivious about like recognizing that allies, right, are constantly a work in progress. So I mean, allies like myself and like maybe even for yourself, like we are actually making mistakes and learning from them, and that's totally okay, right? So I may not truly understand what somebody with a disability or minority in Singapore may actually feel, but it's perfectly fine. It's about having honest conversations, talking about it with an open mind. It's about learning, right? So only then with allyship can we make like systematic cultural changes. Yeah, so that's what I personally feel. Yeah.
I think you hit the nail. So we always talk about innovation and risk taking, right? When we're talking about, let's say, in an organization or a workplace, given that focus of topic. But I think to the point of allyship, diversity and inclusivity play a role in progress too. So in turn, if we can actually have this cogs in place or do more on it, it'll probably enable better focus and productivity too, whether an outcome for an individual or a group or an agency as well. And I'm just going to go back to the point that was brought up on the panel earlier about hybrid work. Right. So I think hybrid work is also a contributing factor. None of us probably have gone through such an experience that we have now. And it's been made harder, right, in the current climate. We have less opportunities to actually talk to people or interface with people or have that change where you're sleeping, working, eating is around the same proximity as well. So we end up having to make or thinking to make about more deliberate steps when engaging someone in the workplace or outside. And I think that's where, that's one small example, but I think that's where allyship could come in.
Correct. Yeah. So actually, in Microsoft, we actually make a very, very concerted effort. Like there are like courses that we need to undertake. So like for myself, we have to complete like a certain amount of courses. And then we do have guidance on what kind of like gender neutral languages to use and stuff like that. So yeah, that actually helps introduce a bit of like core concept like, unconscious biasness, allyship, and privileges. At the end of the day, it's all about like making an effort to have such conversations. So I think even for Microsoft, right, we had this conference called the Microsoft Include 2021. I'm not sure whether you heard about it, but it's a global digital diversity and inclusion event. So we get others on board and, to hear more perspective, inward and outward. Yeah.
So I think just to add to that point, from an individual perspective, I would probably say that some of the things that could probably help, and you have already touched on some of them, are things like awareness. So you're trying to understand people's experience or pain points better. Action in terms of creating a sense of belonging, right? Making sure nobody feels left out, right? And accessibility, like when you're doing it, you hopefully try to do it for all. And advocacy. So I say all these things, they may not necessarily always be easy, but I think when we are a bit more aware of them, we'll try to do it a bit better. So that includes maybe even speaking up for someone or something that you see, and you don't necessarily have to be a leader to do that, right? Yeah.
Yep, that's true. Okay, so I guess like before we make this into a Meihu and Sue's talk show, we should pretty much invite Anj back on the screen. So I'm gonna like get Anj back. Hi, Anj.
Hi, hello, I'm back again. And that was a good conversation. It's like the first thing that I need to do is first is acceptance, and then communication, and then courage to speak up. Did I hit the point?
Yeah, you did. Yeah.
Okay, so before, yeah. So now let's bring up everyone for Q&A.
Hi, everybody. Welcome back.
Welcome back, everyone. So let's check the comments sections in YouTube channel if there's a comment. If
We
there's
don't
a
have,
Q.
yeah. Well, okay, we invite people to sort of like share their stories. If there aren't any questions, you could share stories as well. Yeah.
Going on. So,
Okay.
I'm just kidding. Okay. I think let's take a picture. What do you think?
Okay, sure. I can take a picture of all of us. Okay, wait, let me screen grab. Okay, everybody look into the camera. Oh, wait, hang on. Let me just put in the banner as well. Sorry. Okay, so this looks better, right? Okay. Okay, 1, 2, 3, everybody smile. Okay, cool. Yeah. All right, Anj.
And
What do we
I
have
think
next?
before we end this conversation, this is the end. So, I mean, no, it's not the end. I mean, before we end this conversation, I guess the only thing that we have is our journey doesn't end here, and we are still in progress. So, I just want to let everyone know that we need to be kind to one another and be yourself, embrace the change, and learn from each other. And you will never know how valuable it is for you, for your life and others. And with that, please check out these resources. Also, before I end this conversation, I would like to say thank you so much again for all the panelists and all the attendees who come in for today's sessions. Thank you so much, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye, everyone.
Thank you.